Hello and welcome, this is Agent XP. Today we're going to tackle a much requested tutorial subject, and that is using next-gen scripted triggers to trigger events. Now this is something that is incredibly useful. Using traditional TRLE triggers, you cannot stack special triggers. So for example, switch, pad, key, heavy, all of those types of triggers are considered special triggers and you cannot stack them using the traditional trigger method, particularly if you're using the original core design level editor. If you're using the newer Tomb editor, then this won't be an issue for you. However, there are still benefits to using next-gen triggers, and it's much easier to set up multiple events happening with the same trigger if you use what's called a trigger group. What I'm going to do for this example is I'm going to set up a next-gen trigger which triggers a camera target, 2 gorillas and some music, and I'm going to combine all of this into one trigger group. All the details for this trigger group will be stored in the level script, and the only physical trigger that you'll need in the level is a trigger for the actual trigger group. So only one trigger required for all the events that we're going to set up. The process for doing this is pretty similar whether you're using NGLE like me or whether you're using the newer Tomb editor, so you should be able to follow what I'm doing using either editor. So let's get started. So you can see here I have this room which I'm going to be using to show this example, and I've placed Lara in the room to make it a little quicker to test. And I have a gorilla here. Now I'm actually going to place a second. It's actually in the wild boar slot, so I'm going to go find another one of these dudes. The next thing I'm going to want to do is set up a camera and camera target, pretty much how you would set them up using the traditional method. So I'm just going to grab out the camera target item like so, and I'm going to place it here. So it's kind of in the middle of the room. You can't get it exactly in the middle of these two guys using NGLE, but this is the closest we can achieve. So I've placed it there, and what I'm also going to do is go to Effects, and I'm going to pick out a fixed camera, and we're going to place the camera here, like so, and that is cool. So we have in place 2 gorillas, we have a camera target, and we have a fixed camera. So I now want to set up triggers for these items. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my camera target, and I am going to open the trigger menu. And what you want to do is, instead of selecting your traditional target trigger and placing it on the tile, what you're going to want to do is scroll up and find action. A general rule for finding triggers is that movable object triggers tend to be listed under the action section. So we're going to click on action, and that is going to give us another option down in the timer parameter window. So we're going to want to open this up and scroll down until we find the trigger options. And here we are going to want to select target. So we have an action trigger for a camera target, and now we want to click on export script trigger. When you click on export trigger, it will cause a text document to pop open on your screen. So you need to find this, and you might be a little bit confused by what it shows. All you need to do is take this line of characters at the end of the script command. What this does is it explains exactly what the trigger is doing. So it tells you that it's an action trigger number 42, it's for a camera target, and it tells you the ID of said camera target. It also tells you the trigger type that you have used, and the only thing that you need to take from this is the last few characters here. So there are 3 values. And this is what we will need to copy into our script. The next thing we need to do is open up our NextGen Center application. I've now opened up NextGen Center, and that is what you need to have open for all the scripting that you will do, so it's worth having it open as you are building. And what I'm looking at here is the typical script entry for one of the default levels that are provided with the level editor. So this is the script section for the catacombs level. So this basically defines your level entry, and within this level you can see all of these values. Now these values refer to all the keys and puzzle item pickups. So you're going to want to ignore those, and I'm actually going to press delete for now because we don't actually need any of them. What you're left with in the script is 4 lines, and these are the bare bones values that you need in your script to define a level. So we're going to want to put any scripting between the name field and the level field, as this kind of opens and closes your level field within the script. The start of the level script will be the name, and the end will be the level, so put all of your scripting in between these 2 tags. So I'm going to scroll up, and I'm actually not going to use the catacombs script at all. I just showed you that for a simple example, as that is what you are likely to see when you open up your script for the first time. Now I'm going to scroll up, and as you can see I have a lot of very complicated things in my script, but don't be overwhelmed by this. I was at first, but when you come to understand what these script commands do, they're actually very simple. So I'm now going to return to the text file that we generated earlier using the level editor trigger section, and I'm now going to take those 3 values that I showed you earlier and copy these, and we can then paste them into our script. I'm now going to come back to NextGen Center, and I'm going to find the section in my Palace Midas level script that I'm going to use for setting up triggers. And I've scrolled to this section, and I have this line here which says triggers. Now this is actually a comment line, so the compiler will ignore this and not try to generate it because it has the semicolon at the start of the line, and you can use this to add useful comments so that you know which parts of your script do what. And believe me, when your script becomes as complicated as this one, you are going to be so glad of having these comments. So I'm going to add in a new comment which refers to the section of the level that I am going to be working on. So I'm going to add a section in here called Midas Garden so that I know what it refers to. And what I am going to do now is I am going to copy in the line that I just copied and pasted from the text document. Now if I just leave that there on its own, that's going to cause a problem when we try and build the script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this trigger group value. I'm going to put it in the line above this script entry. I'm going to delete the value 1 because I probably already have a trigger group assigned the value 1. So I'm going to press the F1 key, and that will generate automatically the next free trigger group number that is available. So all of these trigger groups need to have unique values, otherwise when you try and trigger it in your level, it won't know which one that you are referring to. So each of these needs to have a unique number, and the F1 key will really help you in that regard. So what I'm now going to do is I am going to bring that value I copied and pasted onto the same line as this trigger group. And the trigger group value will need a comma after it, and you can then press the shift key to put a space between that and the value. Now this doesn't matter, but I like to do this because it helps you to see the values a little more clearly. So this is just for show, it is not needed for the actual code. I'm now going back to my level editor window, and I'm going to select my fixed camera. I'm now going to click on the trigger window, and I'm going to find the action trigger once again, and we're going to scroll down the list until we come to trigger, and I'm going to pick camera. And if you just clicked on your fixed camera, then it should pop up in your trigger window. Otherwise, you can scroll down and select the correct camera from the list. So this will fill in all the values that you need, except for this extra value at the bottom. And you're going to want to click 3 here if you want your camera to show for 3 seconds. So pick whatever value you want. You might want a shorter camera, or you might want a slightly longer camera. I'm going to pick 3 as that tends to be a good length. And I'm now going to click on Export Script Trigger. Once again, this has given us an exported text document, and we can see the description for the trigger. It's a camera trigger for activating the camera with timer value 3, which means it is going to last for 3 seconds. And once again, this value after the colon is the value that we need to copy and paste into the script. So I'm going to press Ctrl C, and I'm going to come back to my NextGen center. Now, assuming we want to put another value in the same trigger group, we're going to need to separate these commands. And what I'm going to do is put in a comma, press space, and copy the next value in. So basically, for a trigger group, all you need is the command TriggerGroup equals said number, comma, and a list of these values or commands separated by commas. It really is as simple as that. However, as you can imagine, if you have a whole load of these trigger groups and a bunch of these nondescript values, then you might begin to struggle to work out what actually does what. So I'm now going to show you how to better display these so that you have a better idea of what does what if you need to come back and edit these. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to click just after the comma after the first value, and I'm going to put in a greater than symbol. I'm now going to press enter, and this is going to move the second value to a new line. I'm now going to press tab a couple of times and just take out the odd space there and align the 2 values. So you can see I have one value above the other. Now the greater than symbol is what you're going to need if you want to start a new line. So every time you break up one of these lists of values, you're going to need to put a comma and a greater than symbol after each one if you're going to want to expand the trigger group to a new line. What I'm also going to do after the greater than symbol is press tab. I'm going to put a semicolon, and I'm going to type in target. And that is going to tell me that this command refers to the target. And after this one, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to press tab, semicolon, and I'm going to type camera. And that tells me exactly what that command refers to. What I also like to do is on the line above the trigger group, I'm going to make myself a line. You don't have to do this, I just like to do it because it's decorative and I find it easier to read. I'm going to type in a name for this trigger group. So Midas Garden Corners. There we go. So what I've done is I've given myself a name for this trigger group. So I now know what this trigger group is responsible for. If I am scrolling through the script, I can see exactly what this trigger group does. So for now, all we're doing is triggering the camera and the target. I think it might be nice to trigger the gorillas as well, and also have some music, and we can do that. You can have multiple values per trigger group. Now there is a maximum number you can have, but I'm not entirely sure how many that is. and I believe I've had a successfully working trigger group with at least a dozen values in it. And you can use a trigger group to trigger another trigger group, so you can have multiple trigger groups within a trigger group should you choose to. So I'm going to go back to my level editor screen, and now I'm going to click on one of the gorillas, and we're going to click on the set trigger type window again, and I'm going to select action again, and we have the wild boar appear here because I just clicked on him. And we're going to scroll down the list, and the trigger I'm now going to choose is the option trigger movable activate object with timer value, and I'm going to input that. And that is the trigger that we need. So I'm now going to click on export. So I'm going to click on that, and that is going to generate us a new text file. And you probably know the drill by now. I am going to copy that value, and I'm going to open NextGen Center. So I've opened a NextGen Center, and I'm now going to paste this value into the script. But we now have another new line, so what I'm going to do on the line above is add in a comma and a greater than symbol, so we now won't get any errors when we build the script because we've told the compiler that there is a new line. Now that we have our first gorilla trigger in place, rather than go through the whole process of generating that command again, what we can do is press paste and repaste in that same value. Before I forget, I'm going to put in the new line symbol on the line above, and what I'm now going to do is I'm going to click back onto my level editor window. So I'm now going to click on the second wild boar, and all I need is the value of that object, and you can see that it is 2252. So I'm going to go back to NextGen Center now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this value to 2252, and that will trigger the correct gorilla. When you're working with these movable object script commands, the middle value generally refers to the ID of the object. Where you're activating a movable, that is quite a generic trigger, and you can reuse this for multiple different objects and simply change the ID value in the middle, and that will save you quite a lot of time. It means you won't have to manually go through the process of generating the trigger for every single object. We now have triggers for a target, a camera, and 2 gorillas. But I think it might be nice to have some music as well. So before you set up the music trigger, it's a good idea to have a browse through your audio folder and check to see the ID number of the track that you want to use. In my case, I have track number 127, which is the gorilla theme from Tomb Raider Anniversary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my trigger window once again. I'm going to scroll down this list, and I'm going to choose the flip effect option. We now want to use this object trigger box, and click on that, scroll down the list and find the sound option, and the one we are going to want to choose is sound CD, play CD in E-Way on channel 2. So NGLE has 2 sound channels, channel 1 and channel 2. This allows 2 music tracks to play concurrently. So you have your background tomb ambience, which is playing on channel 1, which might be your eerie tomb sound effects or your cold icy wind sound effects in the background. And channel 2 is where you're going to want your foreground music. So if you come across a bunch of gorillas, for example, and you want some startle sounding music, that is where you are going to want to put it. So we're going to choose the option sound CD, play CD track in E-Way on channel 2. And if we come down here, we've got the option single playback. You can also choose looped playback, but you don't really want to do that on the foreground track, so you're generally going to want to choose single playback, and I am going to select the correct track number. At the moment it's set to track 0, so we're going to want to scroll down our list and find audio track 127 in my case. script. That's what I've called my gorilla theme track. And now we want to click on Export Script Trigger once again. So now we have our command and we can copy that. So back to NG Center, you probably know the drill by now, but we're going to put a comma in and a greater than symbol for a new line. I'm going to press tab a couple of times to indent the line, and I'm going to paste in this script value. Before I finish, I'm going to label the remaining triggers. So I'm going to put in gorilla times 2 here, so that I know I have 2 gorilla triggers. And I'm going to come to this line and I'm going to put in music 127, so I know what this line refers to. So I now have my trigger group, and all that remains is to trigger it within the level. So now that I'm back in my level editor window, I am going to move Lara back to the doorway of the room. I'm going to click on this tile underneath Lara. I'm going to bring up the trigger window once again, and I am going to select this what to trigger option. I'm going to scroll down the list and choose a flip effect. There are several options relating to trigger groups, and the one that I'm going to choose is this one, trigger group perform and trigger group from script.dat in eWay. What I'm going to do now is choose the timer parameter option, and it will give you a whole list of trigger group numbers. So we were working on trigger group number 14, so I'm going to pick that one, and I'm also going to select this multiple performing option, scroll down and select single performing. We only want it to run once. So now we're going to click on OK, and we're now going to place the trigger underneath Lara. So you'll want to press the magenta trigger button, and as you can see here, that will generate a trigger for the trigger group underneath Lara. So after all that, the only trigger we need on the actual map is the one relating to triggering the trigger group. And when we go in game, that is now going to run the entire trigger group that we exported to the script. But before we do that, we do need to go back to NextGen Center. Once you have finished scripting what you want to script, you're going to need to press save in your script. Make sure you do that, otherwise if you close down NextGen Center and reopen it, all your scripting will vanish. So do remember to click save after you've scripted something that you're happy with. And now we're going to need to choose the build option, and that will pop up with a sort of DOS-like window, and that will compile your script. So the next time you run your level editor and load up your level, this script will now be active, providing you have a trigger for it on your map. I'm going to add one final thing to this trigger group setup tutorial. This relates to triggers crossing multiple tiles. Say for example you wanted this trigger group to run when Lara crosses this point of the room. Now currently there is only 1 square worth of trigger because we're triggering it as Lara goes through the door. But what if we want it to trigger when Lara enters this point of the room? As you can see, the trigger spans multiple tiles. While we can only trigger the gorillas once, the music and the cameras are going to trigger multiple times if we have the trigger group trigger spanning multiple squares. Every time Lara steps on one of these squares, the trigger group is going to run, even if we've selected the single performing option, as it will count each square as a new trigger. So in order to avoid this, what we want to do is go back to our NextGen Center one more time. So coming back to our trigger group, if we want this trigger group to only run once, what I'm going to do is add in an extra command. So I'm going to press copy and paste and add in this command, which is tgroup single shot plus, and I'm going to put this before the first value. So I have tgroup underscore single shot underscore space plus space and then the generated value. and that will ensure that your trigger group only runs once if the trigger group trigger is spread across multiple tiles. So for demonstration purposes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this trigger on the single tile, and I'm going to move this to multiple tiles so that we can check that the single shot attribute works. And I'm just rechecking we have our trigger all set up here. This is trigger group 14. So if Lara now steps on one of these tiles, the trigger group should activate, and it shouldn't continue activating if she steps on multiple of these tiles. The location of this trigger will mean that the gorillas appear in midair, but this is just for demonstration purposes. Once we see that this works, I can move the trigger back to the doorway so that Lara turns the corner before she sees the gorillas. So I'm now going to output and compile the level, and we should see this in action. Also, don't forget to click save and click build on your script once again. As you saw there, the trigger group successfully activated, and even if we run over multiple tiles, the music will not re-trigger thanks to the one-shot option. So we've looked at how you successfully trigger multiple events using just one trigger in the level and a scripted trigger group. So I hope you guys found that helpful. If you did, please do consider liking the video, commenting and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do hit the notification bell so that you're notified when I upload future videos. This is Agent XP. Thank you for watching, and TTFN.